The Louie T Network is powered by MusicHead University. MusicHeads, classes in session. Turn me up. Enroll on YouTube now. Link is in the description.
Who else could it be but me, your man, Louie T, here on Training Camp Confidential, day number 4 of training camp with the Washington Commanders. I, of course, am your set man, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. Lots to get to tonight. I first want to start by saying this. Look at me, okay? If you're driving, pull off to the side of the road. I need you to look at me when I say this, because this is very important. Football is back, okay? And it hit my wife like a ton of bricks today. So she asked me earlier on this afternoon, like right around noonish, you working today? And I said, yeah, I told you that on Friday I would be doing a show on Saturday. The team was off from training camp on Saturday. They'd be back after it on Sunday, and I'd be live. And she said, on the weekends? I said, football is back. There are no weekends now, right? And it hit her like, oh, shit. You know, during the season, you get Friday night and Saturday. Sunday is off limits. So we're getting back into the swing of things. It's becoming real. When the weekends start to kind of whittle away and there's less and less time for family activities and more work involved, especially on a Sunday, you know what time it is. So it's we're getting to that point now. It feels good. I can't front. And then by the time we get to the end, I'm like, whew, I can't wait to get my entire weekend back. But man, I'm jonesing. I'm finked up. And we're getting to that point now as we're now talking about live streams on Sundays. So you already know what it is. So lots of activities to talk about today. Lots to get to from day 4 of training camp. The fellas were back at it after a day off on Saturday. This was back together weekend for the NFL across the entire National Football League. So that was a big thing. This was the first time that the Commanders had fans in attendance. So that was a part of the festivities. Dan Quinn addressed the fan base and people in attendance, talked about their importance and what them coming out to not only these practices, but coming to the games and, you know, what they're going to be and their role in all of this as they try to come in here and turn things around, that the fans are going to be, you know, vital to the success of this team. So we'll see. Obviously, wins and losses and the performance on the field will go a long way in determining will people decide to leave their homes and come and attend the games in person and box out fans from the Eagles and the Cowboys and the Giants and so forth and so forth. But at the end of the day, the first time that this new iteration of the Commanders with Adam Peters and Dan Quinn and his staff and these players have seen the fans in attendance, and it was good to go ahead and get that going. Lots to talk about from a practice standpoint. There were a lot of things that, you know, we had either, you know, mentioned in passing or, you know, we have talked about already. Now it's really starting to come to fruition. So we'll get to a lot of those things. We heard from 3 people at the podium today, 2 players and the coach. So that seems to be a theme, right? That we're going to hear from 2 players and the coach. Now, I expect that to be altered as we continue throughout camp, because at some point I expect to hear from defensive coordinator Joe Witt Jr. I expect to hear from offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury. They may sneak in Larry Izzo, special teams coordinator. They may sneak in quarterbacks coach. There may be a day where they allow the assistant coaches to have a little say. So they're going to have, I think, practices where 3 or 4 guys are made available to the media, things of that nature. So I expect that to maybe be altered. But as of right now, it seems like the theme is 2 players and head coach Dan Quinn. Today, we heard from DaRon Payne and Marcus Mariota, and then the head coach Dan Quinn. So we'll talk about what was said by those 3 individuals a little bit later on. But what I want to start with was practice itself and some takeaways. So let's jump into that. We start with, as I mentioned, the fans. I did put that in my notes. Having the fans back out there, back together weekend, league-wide. Washington had their fans in attendance for the first time. I think that brought a little bit more energy and juice. For instance, there was a run by quarterback Jaden Daniels off to the left side. I've seen clips of it where, he pulled it out on a read option, kept it, got out there, and the fans kind of went off and made a bunch of noise. And, the players feed off of that. And I think as the pads go on, I think then that's when that energy from the fans is going to become even more paramount. So, fans were out there. Let's talk about the offensive line, though. I want to start there because we had talked about the offensive line shuffle, and Dan Quinn had talked about how as camp persists, as it moves forward and gets deeper into camp, they're going to start playing around with different combinations of offensive linemen to kind of figure out what is the best combination that they can put on the field. Now, we all think that when it's all said and done, from left to right, it's going to be Cornelius Lucas at left tackle, Nick Allegretti at left guard, Tyler Biadasz at center, Sam Cosmi at right guard, and Andrew Wiley at right tackle. That's the group they came into camp with. And I said that was going to be important for me to see because that's telling me what they envisioned the line being going in. Again, it could change. And all of this is subject to change. But it was important to see whose job was it to lose. And in the first 2 days, they really didn't tinker with the first team offensive line. It was day 3 that they started to move guys around. Now, I think some of that has to do with Andrew Wiley having what he described as some tightness. Okay. So he was out on the practice field doing individual drills. He participated in no team activities today, did Andrew Wiley. He said he will be absolutely ready to go on Monday when the pads go on, but he did not participate in any team drills. So no 7-on-7s, no 11-on-11s, none of that stuff. He stayed out of those things. So that allowed for some shuffling of the deck. And we saw a little bit of that on Friday, day 3 of training camp, when we talked about Brandon Coleman getting some reps at right tackle. And that was a breath of fresh air. That was something that was a little bit exciting for a lot of us. So they started tinkering around with the offensive line, even more so with Andrew Wiley not being in the lineup for practice in team drills today. So what we got was another shuffling of the deck. And this was a little bit more significant of a shuffle, because I don't know if this is sustainable, but you need to see what guys can do in different spots to be able to figure out what is the best, group that you can put on the field. So with that said, Brandon Coleman got snaps at left tackle. So did I always forget this dude's name. The Steelers offensive tackle that we got. I always forget his name. Jesus. He got some reps, but more importantly, Brandon Coleman got some reps at left tackle with the ones, and Cornelius Lucas moved over to right tackle, right? So that was really interesting to see them shift Cole Luke over from left to right, give Coleman some run with the first team offensive line, kind of see what that looks like, how that feels. Again, it gets real tomorrow because the pads go on, and now you can really start to assess how a guy's doing, where he's struggling. Can he do this for real? This is when it gets serious, because now you're going to start to hear, media members, the coaching staff, you're going to start to hear them get really in depth with the analysis of what guys are doing. Now you can ask real questions about, hey, how do you feel about this player? And there's no more leaning on, well, the pads haven't come on yet, and so we'll really find out. No. A week from now, after there have been several padded practices and you've had a chance to see what some of these guys look like as we head into those joint practices here in a bit. I mean, we got the Hall of Fame game coming up here in roughly 4 days, right? The Hall of Fame game is this week. So understand that not there too long after, the Commanders are going to be playing in a preseason game, and those joint practices are going to take place. And then you're really going to have a feel for what these guys are or aren't doing in the trenches on both sides. But really, the offensive line is what we're really focusing in on. So this was the one of the few, last few days. There will be more practices without pads on. This is not the last unpadded practice of the offseason or training camp into the preseason. But for the most part, a lot of these practices will be padded, and these will be the ones we will be talking about. So it's good to start seeing them shuffle guys around. Hell, even Michael Dieter got reps at left guard, with the ones, which then kicked Nick Allegretti over to center. So they're playing around with stuff. Nobody here thinks that Tyler Biadasz isn't the starting center, right? Like, so understanding that, you do these types of things. And I remember O-line Bobby Johnson being a stickler for this in New York. I remember watching some interviews that were done with him when he was in New York. And even going back to his days in Buffalo, where he was a stickler for wanting to sub guys in and out, because in a game, anything can happen and you don't know who's going to have to play where. And so it is important to get reps in the offseason, in camp, so that you can get guys comfortable with the idea of, hey, you may have to go in here or you may have to go in there, and this is the guy you're going to be playing next to. We may have to shuffle the deck. So you don't want the opportunity when it springs up in the game to be the first time a guy has experienced that position playing next to that player or that player. So they're doing a lot of shuffling right now, but the real deal will be starting tomorrow when those pads go on. But I like the fact that they're starting to move parts around. I do like that. A couple of tight ends made some really, really good grabs today. So you had the rookie Ben Sinnott with a one-handed grab, reaching kind of behind him on a pass that was a bit errant from Jaden Daniels, that he was able to reach back, snag, and grab with one hand. So that's a great sign to see the young fella getting involved, making a catch. And then you had a guy that I think I am probably as intrigued by at the tight end position as any. And, I had a nice conversation with Logan Paulson, obviously former tight end. He's looking for certain things. I'm always intrigued by guys who used to play the position and the insight that they can lend. And he talked about Amani Rodgers and how his skill set is different than everybody else in that room. And I was one of the ones that was very enamored. You got to give credit where credit is due. Rico was the first, person to be like, hey, look out for Amani Rodgers. Now, I was very dismissive, but at the same time, had every tight end on the roster not gotten injured that offseason, Amani Rodgers would have never made the team. But he took full advantage of that opportunity. And from that point forward, I was like, this is the guy, right? Like, athletically, he checks off every box. He's got size. He's got hands. He used to play the quarterback position, so he sees the game from a different lens. That never hurts. Same thing can be said for Luke McCaffrey. We'll talk about him a little bit later on, because head coach Dan Quinn talked about him in the presser today. But, Logan Thomas had that same perspective. When you used to play the quarterback position, it gives you a different perspective, and you're more of a weapon to the quarterback because you are thinking from that quarterback lens, because you used to be in that seat. You understand what the quarterback's thinking about, what he's looking, what is more comfortable for the quarterback. So it makes you a better target because hey, this is what I was comfortable with when I was at quarterback. This is what made it easier on me. So Amani Rodgers is one of those dudes that he's just different. And if he can get it back to where he was prior to the injury, man, look out. He made a diving catch over the middle of the football field today. So it's good to hear his name. I want to continue to hear his name because he's a guy that I'm looking for to kind of take a step forward. I don't know if they're keeping 4 tight ends. And then I asked Logan Paulson, 4 versus 3. And he's like, we'll see. Don't know what they're going to do yet. But if they're keeping 4, he's a guy to look out for. Obviously, Cole Turner is another guy that's going to be in that mix. Colston Yankoff is a guy that I'm intrigued by, but I don't expect him to beat anybody out, right? But it's a really interesting group these tight ends are. And for the first time in a while, and I've said this, I even said it to Logan Paulson, I think this is the first time in a long time we've had a truly gifted and talented group of tight ends where you're going to feel some type of way about somebody being left off this roster. And I would not be shocked if one of the guys that gets cut ends up signing somewhere else on someone else's active roster, because it's actually that much talent at the tight end position, which is why I'm very intrigued by that positional group. Let's talk about a couple of guys that are, I think, separating themselves. Look, there are a couple of positions, maybe 3 or 4, that I think have some log jams potentially, and there will be some tough decisions that have to be made. I just mentioned one of them being the tight end position. I think defensive tackle, if they're not going to keep 5, right? The number at defensive tackle is usually 4. We've got 3 that are slam dunks, no doubt about it. And I think there are 2 guys vying for 1 spot. Now, they could easily keep 5. We had this conversation the other day, literally on the show that I put out yesterday. I talked about both defensive tackles, John Ridgeway and Fedarian Mathis, kind of battling it out for 1 spot. We'll see what happens, but that's another one of those positions that seems to be extremely talented and deep, and they're going to have to make some tough decisions. Wide receiver, like, I'm not sure how deep and how talented it is, really. But what I do understand is that they're going to have to make a decision or 2 at that position. Again, how many are you keeping? Is it 5? Is it 6? We don't know what that number looks like right now, right? We all assume that the bare minimum is 5 and the maximum is probably 6. I can't envision them keeping a 7th receiver, but anything's possible, right? That said, you feel good about 3 guys for a lot of you. For me, it's 4 because I'm counting De'Ami Brown as well as a guy that's on this football team. So that's 4 receivers if you count Terry, Jahan, Luke, and De'Ami. I'm counting De'Ami Brown. Some of you aren't. That's fine, but I am. So that's 4. I think there is a log jam at the back end of the roster. I think there's 2 spots. I think you keep 6. And we got a bunch of receivers, right? A bunch of guys. I talked about this one guy in particular as being kind of a forgotten man by me. I can't speak for you. He might have been at the top of your list. You might really like him, and you didn't forget about him, but I most certainly did, and I brought him up the other day because he continues to make plays at camp, and this is a way to get noticed from a staff that did not choose you. He was undrafted. You know, the last staff clearly felt some type of way about him, which is why he made the football team last year. But this new staff has no ties to Mitchell Tinsley. Yet, every time we look up, Mitchell Tinsley is making yet another play, another great catch, showing tremendous body control, going up, plucking the football out of the air in traffic, getting his feet down in bounds, making his case to make this football team where there's this 5-6 wide receiver logjam. You're talking about guys like Olamide Zaccheaus, Jamison Crowder, Damiere Byrd, Bryson Tremaine. It's a bunch of guys on that back end of the roster that we don't know. Kaz Allen is another one that may be able to add some special teams value. You're looking for separators this time of the year. What do you bring to the table? What are you able to do to differentiate yourself from the rest of the group that gives you the upper hand? Right now, Mitchell Tinsley is just showing that flat out, I am a better receiver than a lot of these guys. Naturally, I belong. That's what he's showing. He made another big grab today, and he continues to make catches that turn heads, that gets people's attention, and it's hard to deny guys when they just keep showing up. Now, when the pads go on, if he continues to do this and then it bleeds into these joint practices and ultimately into the preseason, he's going to be a tough guy to keep off of this roster for the 2nd year in a row. So as he continues to make plays, we're going to see what happens. And then on the defensive side, a guy who keeps flashing. And again, I had the same conversation with Logan Paulson because Logan Paulson was an undrafted rookie that made the team back in 2010. And so he knows all about what you have to do to get the attention of the staff to be able to stick. And he's like, you got to make plays, you got to flash, and you got to be consistent. a guy that continues to make plays. I don't know how in the hell he can make this roster with how loaded we are at safety. But Tyler Owens is a guy that just keeps making plays. And Logan Paulson, I keep bringing up Logan because we had a number of different guys that we talked about, and I asked him about undrafted guys in particular, and he brought up Tyler Owens because he said, this guy's a freak. He said he looks out of position because he's humongous. Pause. He's a safety that looks like a linebacker, runs like a receiver, and hits like a defensive lineman, right? So this guy is ridiculous. We haven't seen the physicality yet. Maybe we will when the pads go on. I've talked about just how raw he is. He clearly is not ready to help from a defensive standpoint, but on a special teams level with the size, height, speed, and all the things that he brings to the table, he keeps taking the ball away. That's his second interception in 4 practices. And look, man, if you want to stand out as an undrafted defensive player, taking the football away from a group, from a staff that puts the most emphasis on taking the football away, continuing to take it away will get you on the radar. And Tyler Owens continues to do that. So I'm not saying that he's going to make the team, but this is how you give yourself a chance. And he continues to make plays along with Mitchell Tinsley. These are guys that are separating themselves and making a case for them early on. Now, there's a lot of time between now and when they trim that roster down to 53, and a lot of things are going to transpire in between now and then. But you want to get off to a good start. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. And right now, guys like Mitchell Tinsley and Tyler Owens are making strong cases right now to be on this roster. As guys that I think are on the outside looking in right now, they're making strong cases to kind of reconfigure where they are in the pecking order. They're getting off to really good starts. And then lastly, I want to talk about this because this is something that started out as interesting, right? Remember, I kept bringing up kicker, and it seemed like I was being like unreasonable, right? Like, why does he keep talking about kicker? I'm like, because nobody else is, and I'm not comfortable with our kicking situation. But, no news is good news at the kicking front, right? No news is good news on the kicking front. If they don't bring it up, then that means it's business as usual. Nothing to see here. Move on, right? I just wanted somebody to ask Dan Quinn about the kicking situation. Finally, Ben Standig did on day 3. So I said, okay, I'm good. You asked him. He gave us an answer. They're going to continue to bring kickers in here. I've been this entire time adamant that our kicker of the 2024-2025 NFL season is not currently on the roster yet. Meaning Ramiz Ahmed is not going to be our kicker. But I wasn't tripping. I'm like, maybe he could be our Brandon Aubrey, like the Cowboys had last year, right? Get a guy from the UFL, comes in, kicks his ass off, and is outstanding, one of the best kickers in football. Maybe Ramiz Ahmed was just waiting for this opportunity. He had a couple of other stints in the league. They didn't work, but finally he carved out a niche for himself here in Washington. And that may ultimately be the case. He is not helping himself right now. The kicker situation is going from interesting to important very quickly. He missed 3 kicks today, 2 of them clanking off the upright. And so, I don't want to hear about missed kicks, especially where we haven't even gotten to game situations yet. Okay, you should be crushing it in practice. And then if you start having some of the heebie-jeebies and the jitters start to get you in the game, so be it. But if you're missing in practice, we're talking about practice, not a game, but practice, we have a problem on our hands. For a team that you expect to be in a lot of close ball games, and you need every single point you can get, one of the things we can ill afford is to have faulty field goal kicking. They're going to have to figure this out. And it sucks because you're really at the mercy of the rest of the league until teams start cutting some of their extra kickers. Dan Quinn, head coach Dan Quinn said, I think it was day 3 when he was asked about kickers. Over half the league has multiple kickers on their roster. So you got to wait until some of these teams start to figure out, all right, who's got the leg up in our kicking competition? All right, we don't need this extra kicker before we can, because what we're not going to do is keep, scouring the streets looking for guys. We're going to get an NFL kicker, which is why they brought in Brandon McManus initially, because they want a guy with NFL experience to come in here and kick. It's something that you don't want to have to really truly worry about, which is why they spent money, real money, on McManus, and he effed it up. So now we're having a discussion about a position that they thought they had already handled. And again, it went from interesting to important. He missed 3 kicks. Again, he could miss no more kicks the remainder of the week, and we could be fine. But when I start hearing about these things, I get a bit nervous. You can understand that. Anyway, I digress. So that was practice today in a nutshell. Just for quick update purposes, Jaden Daniels had a strong practice today. I thought the third day of practice was, the least of the 3 in terms of sharpness. Kind of got back to looking sharp today. He rolled with the ones very early on. For the first 3 days of practice, it was Mariota jumping out there in 11-on-11s and 7-on-7s with the first team on those first set of reps. And then as it would wear on, Daniels would get out there. Daniels jumped out there first with the first team offense, and then they started to do the back and forth thing. So, he's going to continue to get those reps. They're going to continue to get Marcus reps. But ultimately, we're working on that plan, as head coach DQ said, a plan of action that we know what the end result is supposed to be, but it's that process that they're using to get there. So far, so good. So let's get to what was said at the podium today. And like I said, we had 3 people step up to the podium, 2 players, 1 coach. That's been the consistent theme throughout the first 4 days of training camp. You get 2 players and you get head coach Dan Quinn. The 2 players today, DaRon Payne and Marcus Mariota. So, DaRon is a man of few words. You're not going to get a lot out of him. So, but I actually thought he answered the questions well, and he gave you more than DaRon would have 2 years ago, right? He's a lot more comfortable with the media, but he still doesn't like doing it. And I don't think he ever will, but he's a lot more comfortable. And he gives real answers now. Before, you get 1 or 2 words. Him and Montez Sweat were 2 of the worst at this. Sweat's no longer here. Payne's still here, gutting it out. And he's getting better, right? But this is as good as it's going to get. So, first of all, let me say this. I feel like it is my obligation to say this. DaRon Payne is in the best shape of his life. Have you seen this man? This man is absolutely yoked. I've never seen him look like this before. Have you seen him with his shirt off? Pause. I've seen him with his shirt off. You see him with his shirt on, and his muscles are bulging through his dry fit. Like, when a dude is in tip-top shape. And I said the same thing about Jonathan Allen. Like, I said, man, J. Al looks like he's in tremendous shape. But DaRon is a different animal, bro. Like, I don't know if you've seen this dude. But you know what? This is a consensus among these defensive linemen. I told you John Ridgeway dropped 20. Jonathan Allen is in ridiculous shape, but DaRon Payne takes the cake. But he explained part of why he's in such great shape. Now, he's always been a guy that's put in the work, but he said that this group has them hunting and hustling. He said, they just got us hunting, man. He's like, look, part of the reason I'm in such great shape is he doesn't matter where the ball is on the field. We got to run to the ball. That is the biggest emphasis that's been placed on us as defenders, is wherever the ball is, we have to be there. This is, again, this is a part of the mental switch from Jack Del Rio and just, it is what it is, to Dan Quinn and his maniacal way of playing defense. You guys, for those of you who haven't seen a Dan Quinn, Joe Witt Jr. coached defensive unit, if you didn't focus in on that when he was in Dallas, if you didn't watch it when he was in Atlanta, and you don't really truly know what it looks like, man, are you in for a treat? Because guys are going to be flying around. And when I say that, I do not use that term loosely. Guys literally are going to be flying and flocking to the football. You are going to see 6, 7 hats to the rock on every single snap. And you're going to go, whoa, I haven't seen that in a very long time. And so to hear DaRon Payne talk about, look, doesn't matter where the ball is, we got to be there. And if we don't get there, he says it doesn't matter what happened on the play, it's not a good play for us. Okay? That's how they're graded. Did you bust your ass to get to the action or not? Don't care that it was 15 yards away from where you started the play. You better be there, right? That's the mentality. I go back to Dorrance Armstrong talking about this in OTAs when he said, this shit that Dan Quinn has us doing defensively, it's not normal and it's not easy, which is why you don't see every team doing this, because it is not normal to play like your hair's on fire on every single snap. But that is the way they coach it. That is the way we must play. And if you do it, you reap the ultimate benefits of it. But it's not easy. And I think about guys like DaRon Payne talking about that. But he said that we out here hunting, man. They letting us hunt. And we got to hustle. Period. End of discussion. He was asked about this defense and how it fits into his skill set. And he said, quote, they letting us be explosive. So with this defense, Joe Witt Jr. talked about this in one of his press conferences earlier in the offseason, where he said, we're going to feature our studs, right? We're going to feed the studs, was his direct quote. But he said, we're going to feature our studs. Guys that are playmakers, guys that we think are game wreckers. We're going to make sure we put in specific plays to allow them to do what it is we think they are capable of doing. DaRon Payne, Jonathan Allen are guys that are studs. Those are guys that you expect to see getting plays up front. And I'm going to tie these two things in, because this is what I think is going to unlock Jonathan Allen. He may hit double-digit sacks this year. DaRon Payne, he may get back to the 2022 contract year DaRon this year, based off of something we're going to talk about here in a second. But he talked about being explosive, and this group, this coaching staff, letting them be explosive, putting them in positions to be explosive. Then he took it a step further and he talked about how offenses won't be able to just play them straight up. A lot of times in Jack Del Rio's defense, they set them up in positions where they got one-on-ones, right? And they asked them to win one-on-ones. And DaRon was like, yeah, that's cool, and you want one-on-ones, but also teams can watch you on tape, see the things you like to do, and take that away. If you're an elite rusher, if you get one-on-one, that's all you can ask for, honestly. Like, Aaron Donald isn't complaining about teams watching tape, or he didn't used to complain about teams watching tape on him. If he got one-on-one, he devoured it. J.J. Watt got one-on-one, he devoured it. The best pass rushers in the league, all they want is one-on-one. Look, just give me one-on-one and I'll take care of the rest. So I really don't want to hear anybody complaining about one-on-one, but at the same time, he's not wrong that it's a lot easier to block a guy or to have a chip, to double team, or not even to necessarily double team for the entire rep, but just, hey, I'm going to give you a little bit of help, give you a little nudge here just to make sure you stay on them, and then I'm going to go ahead and mind my business, right? So it's a lot easier when it's just, where the guy's rushing from. With this group, a lot of twists and stunts, a lot of games up front, a lot of movement amongst these defensive linemen. And he talked about playing with Dorrance Armstrong and Cleveland Farrell. And he said, man, it's just been fun to play with, some different defensive linemen. Not that he was knocking Chase Young and Montez Sweat, but he was, he mentioned, Ryan Kerrigan and just all the different defensive ends he played with. And it's just always refreshing when you get some new guys in there. I'm going to take it a step further. I'm putting words in DaRon's mouth, and I shouldn't do this, but this is me drawing inferences, right? This is what I do. Y'all know this is what I do. I think he's excited to play with Dorrance Armstrong and Cleveland Farrell. Not because they're necessarily better than Montez Sweat and Chase Young. None of us think that that's the case. All right, some of you might think they may be better than Chase Young, but that's nor here nor there. I think he's excited to play with them because those guys are a lot more selfless, meaning they're not out for self. They're not looking to get theirs, right? It's one thing to run a twist and a stunt and a game with a guy who should be setting you up to get free, but in his mind, I'm going to try to get there, right? I want it. I know this is for you, and if I run this correctly, you should come scot-free. But you know what? I might not run it as tight as I should, because if I run it as tight as I should, I'm going to get two. You ain't going to get blocked at all, and you get to eat, and I want to eat. So if I don't run it as tight, I might be able to bounce off of one of these dudes, get inside, and while you still get a little blocked, I now bounce off of a guy that's unsuspecting, and now I got a direct path to the quarterback. So what I'm saying is, when you got defensive ends looking to get theirs, they're a little bit selfish. They're not running it the way that they should. And so it's not as effective as it ultimately could be for the guys that it's supposed to be set up for. When you're running games, you have to be selfless because it's not about you. Unless it's drawn up for you to be the one to get the pressure. Because a lot of times, the first guy that comes looping around, he is the collector. He's the guy that's supposed to be attracting the attention. And then the guy that comes looping around second is the guy that's supposed to come scot-free, right? That's how that's supposed to work. You come crashing in there, you take the center and the guard, and then the defensive end comes looping around, and he comes in scot-free. Vice versa. That defensive end comes crashing down on that guard and center. You come looping around inside that tackle. He doesn't get over fast enough. Bam, you're scot-free to the quarterback. If it's done correctly, guys come scot-free. I watch the 49ers do it all the time, which is where Darryl Tapp came from. I can't tell you how many times I've seen Nick Bosa come scot-free. I'm like, how in the hell did you not touch Nick Bosa? Then they show the replay like, oh, that's why. They just ran a beautiful game up front, right? A TE, a tackle in stunt, which is when the tackle goes first, in loops around, comes in scot-free. And so I think playing with a Dorrance Armstrong and a Cleveland Farrell already in this small little sample size, he's already seen two dudes who are selfless, who aren't thinking about their stats, who are doing this for the betterment of all of us and are willing to sacrifice, to take a bullet, so to speak, to go in, take on two dudes, knowing that, hey, you might get to the quarterback. This is drawn up for you, and I'm going to do it so that you get to reap the rewards and the benefit of this play. I think that's why he's so excited. He talked about Cleveland Farrell having so much energy, and it's been confirmed. Just so you know, we talked about this. I mentioned this when I heard from Jonathan Allen last week, but I'm reiterating it here because we know who the starting four defensive linemen are. If there was ever any question, let's put that to bed now. Dorrance Armstrong and Cleveland Farrell, your two starting defensive ends, and your two starting tackles, you already know, are Jonathan Allen and DaRon Payne. So there's nothing else to discuss. We've heard about Cleveland Farrell. We heard about Dorrance Armstrong. They gave him a 3-year contract, so we know Dorrance is one of the starters, and Cleveland Farrell is starting opposite of him. So there's no discussion as to who the four guys are when they start the game off. Now it's a question of, head coach Dan Quinn talked about Dante Fowler Jr., so he clarified his role, which we already knew, but it just gets me excited because I've talked about this all offseason, but we'll talk about him a little bit later on. I just think when you look at what they've set up, this is going to be an interesting group because I think you're going to see guys playing for one another instead of – remember, I think – I don't know if you guys remember, but Jack Del Rio talked about it, but I think even more importantly, Warren Sapp talked about this. He said, you guys can't be 4 independent contractors rushing after the quarterback. Y'all got to play as one. Y'all got to play as a unit. And it too often, remember one of the things Rivera used to get upset about with Montez Sweat and Chase Young in particular was they didn't play team ball all the time, right? Remember, a lot of you used to think, hey, this defense is better off. When they got hurt in 2021 and the defense suddenly came alive, a lot of you started talking that crazy nonsense about how better off the defense was, which was crazy, which was insane. And we saw it firsthand last year. That is not true. This defense was not better without them. However, I do think there is the element of selfishness. You know, when you're talking about guys out to get theirs, I think there is an element of selfishness. I don't think that's going to exist, and it's going to lead to those defensive tackles eating a little bit more and others around them eating well also. So I'm excited about that. And then he also talked about this was a funny quote. It was, I don't think he meant to throw shade, but he did indirectly. He talked about head coach, defensive line coach Darryl Tapp and his importance and what he's instilled in them to this point and what he's done. And he's like, man, he's so intentional. Everything he does has a purpose. And then DaRon went on to say, and I quote, he don't just come out here just to do things to waste time, close quote. Let me say that again. For those of you keeping score at home, let me say this one more time. He says, quote, of defensive line coach Darryl Tapp, he don't just come out here just to do things to waste time, close quote. I mean, if that ain't a shot at the last staff, I don't know what is, right? I mean, he's essentially telling you, we used to be out here doing bullshit that didn't apply to the field. It didn't make us any better. They were just out here having us do drills just to say, hey, man, we got some individual work for y'all. This might not help y'all actually get better, but, and I don't know how the hell, you know, us throwing beach balls at you is going to help you, you know, get better. But, hey, we got you out here doing some crazy shit just so we can say, hey, we got some shit for y'all to do. So he's like, nah, he's intentional. He ain't got us out here wasting our time. Everything that we do is with a purpose, and it applies to what we're doing on the field. Well, damn. I don't know what else to tell you. Payne told us everything we needed to know right there. So that was DaRon Payne in a nutshell and his presser. You go on to Marcus Mariota. This was the first time we probably had heard from the first player in franchise history to ever wear the number 0, Marcus Mariota. Since his introductory presser, I don't think we have heard from him since. Maybe we've heard from him once more. But a lot of the questions aimed at him, and you would expect this, had a lot to do with Jayden Daniels, his development, his mentorship with Jayden Daniels, things he's seen from Jayden to this point, things that they've talked about, et cetera, which is what you would expect, right? So one of the first things he talked about was on Jayden Daniels picking his brain, right? And he said, yeah, that's definitely occurring. Like, you know, Jayden's coming to me, asking me questions, and that's the way it should be. I'm going to him. If I see something and I'm talking to him about it, and we're bouncing ideas off of each other, and we're talking about a lot of different things. So, you know, part of why I'm here is to help, you know, with his development. And a lot of times we want to put him in the position that when something happens in the game, it's not the first time that it's come up. So it's not a shock to his senses. You know, it comes up in practice, or we see something happen to one of us at the quarterback position. We need to have a dialogue about it. So if it happens to him, it won't spook him. It won't be the first time he's seen it, and he won't be surprised by it. He talked about having multiple former quarterbacks in the building and specifically in the room, that quarterback room. We've talked about that. Head coach Dan Quinn's talked about that. Jayden Daniels has talked about that. Cliff Kingsbury has talked about that. So that's been a topic of discussion, and it's a real thing. Having guys that have played the position helps. You know, it's no other way to say it. I think players relate to other guys who have played the position. They just relate to them better. Not that they're better coaches, but it's easier to relate to somebody knowing that they've done what you're doing. They've gone through what it is you're going through. So it makes it a lot easier for them to relate to you. And I think it makes it easier for them to get through to some of these players. So he talked about the discussions that go on because of all of these guys that have played the quarterback position. He says just a really healthy dialogue amongst guys that have played the position. So he talked about that. He talked about Jaden Daniels' biggest growth he's seen thus far from the young second overall pick. And he said, commanding the offense in the huddle. He said one of the hardest things he found, as a young quarterback. And he talked about a number of things that he's been trying to convey to Jaden as a veteran who has been in his shoes as the number 2 overall pick, coming off of a Heisman Trophy, et cetera, et cetera. But he said one of the hardest things for him early on in his career was commanding the huddle. You know, you're a young guy. You got these 7, 8, 9, 10-year vets in here. Here you are, this young, wide-eyed rookie, and you need to come in here and lead these guys. And he's like, Jaden's done a tremendous job of coming in. First thing to really show the guys that you're serious is to command the playbook, to understand what everybody's responsibility is. So when you get in a huddle, you can say the play with conviction. But not only that, you get everybody lined up. Guys running to the wrong side of the formation. Hey, come over here, this way, right? So that's a quick and easy way to show leadership, right? So he's been really impressed by that with Jaden. And then just being able to get in the huddle and command the huddle. As a young guy, it's not the easiest thing to do. And he said he's been really pleased with his poise to this point. He talked about what he can provide Jaden. It's always refreshing to hear from Mariota from this standpoint, because I need you to know your role. All right. Last year, I loved Jacoby Brissett, and he was an excellent teammate from all reports. But Jacoby came in here to compete. Like, he really thought he was going to get a chance. And his main purpose was to be here to support Sam. And that ain't what he came in. And sometimes when you're a veteran quarterback and you want to play, you don't necessarily come in and adhere to the role that you were brought in. It's a little bit different when it's a second overall pick in the draft. You know what it is. When we invest the number 2 overall pick, you know what it is. You know what, and again, Marcus was brought here first, knowing that was a realistic possibility. They didn't tell him, hey, we're going to draft a quarterback and we want you to mentor him. But he already knew what the situation was. And once they drafted Jaden Daniels, number 2 overall, he already knew, okay, what my role is and what they need from me. I'm going to go out here, I'm going to compete. And, if my number's called, I'm going to do what I need to do. But ultimately, my goal is to come in here and give as much of the game as I've got to this young quarterback to help him be successful. When the guy that you're behind is a 5th-round pick, it's easy for you to be like, F that dude. I should be playing, right? I kind of got a little bit of those vibes from Jacoby Brissett last year. Marcus understands what it is, and I'm appreciative of that. As you see things go off the rails with other situations, and we've experienced situations in the past. It's a little different when it's 2 rookies, when it was Kirk and Robert, but when you've seen these situations go awry, you have a greater appreciation for when it's going the way that it's supposed to go. And to hear Marcus Mariota talk about schooling up Jaden and telling him, hey, don't try to be perfect. One of the things that I tried to do as a rookie, coming in, number 2 overall pick, savior of the franchise, former Heisman Trophy winner, all of these things, you come in and you try to be perfect. You try to do everything exactly the way you think it's supposed to be done. You become mechanical and you stop playing the game the way that you played it that led you to being a Heisman Trophy winner, right? You stop playing on instincts and you start going out there and you start being robotic. And that's not what got you to this point. It's not who you are. It's the same shit that happened to Sam Howell last year, right? When he stopped playing the game the way that he was playing early in the season and started playing robotic because this is what they were trying to get him to do. And you just want guy, and that's what I talked about with Jaden. What was it? I think it was day 2. It might have been day 3 after he spoke, but because he was talking about, if it's not there, throw it away, live to fight another day, all that good stuff. And that's what you're supposed to tell your young quarterback. These are the things you tell them, avoid bad plays, don't take sacks, all of that good stuff. I just want him to be him. That's the same shit I said about Sam last year. And they coached and they got the aggressiveness and the instinctual nature out of Sam. They beat that out of him and they coached it out of him. And I just want to make sure that, and I felt like to a certain extent that happened to Robert too, where in that rookie season, he was all in. So he was willing to tuck it and run. He was willing to be instinctual. And then after all of that success and the Kirk thing, and he saw how they ran the offense with Kirk and it didn't feel like the same offense he was running, all of a sudden now he wasn't the same instinctual quarterback. I got to prove to them I can play from the pocket. So now I'm not going to take off and run like I was in my rookie season, because I need them to know I can play like Brady and Rodgers and Manning from the pocket. And that was where he went wrong, right? I just want Jaden to stay true to who he is, play instinctual football. And that's what Marcus is essentially saying. Like, don't try to be perfect, Don't try to make every perfect throw, every perfect decision. He said, you're gonna have mistakes. And I heard Jaden say this, and that's why I know he's listening to Marcus. He's like, I'm gonna make mistakes, but I need to grow from those mistakes, get better, and try not to repeat those mistakes. So I love the influence that Marcus is having on him right now. It's I really like Marcus being in this room, because the experiences are so similar between the two of them. And then he talked about, yes, Jonathan Oliver. You said Brian Johnson was on the cover of NCAA Football 2010. I think he was, but I remember I was trying to think of who the other quarterback was. I said there were 4, and I could only come up with 3 quarterbacks: Cliff Kingsbury, Tavita Pritchard, and David Blau. Brian Johnson is the 4th quarterback. That was the guy that I couldn't think of. I said there are 4 quarterbacks in that building. I just couldn't think of the 4th guy. I said there's another guy in there. I just don't know who. It was Brian Johnson. There you go. So then he was asked about pads going on. And, obviously not much changes for the quarterbacks with the pads. That's really more of a offensive line, trenches type thing, defensive line, running backs, tight ends. Everybody can get hit now except for the quarterback. But he said, it's really mental for the quarterback, and with the pads going on, there's a lot that goes on in the brain of a quarterback, from obviously, bodies being around you a little bit more aggressively to not wanting to get your players lit up, ball placement becomes more important now, because earlier in camp, when you weren't getting guys hit, you could throw a ball behind them, they could reach behind them, and there was no, consequences for that. You put the ball in a bad spot and a guy gets exposed, that's on you as a quarterback. So there's a little bit of that, right, going on. There's a little bit of the, all right, now there's some trash around me a little bit. There that factors into it a little bit more. And then he talked about, just how things get a little bit faster with the pads on. Now you really got to think. So I thought it was a good interview. It was a good presser. Good to hear from Marcus Mariota, because I think he's going to have a very positive impact on Jaden Daniels. Then we heard from head coach Dan Quinn. And he talked obviously before practice started, and not a lot about Jaden today, which was refreshing, and I could tell he was happy. The first question was about Jaden and about DQ being a defensive coordinator for a number of years, having coached against rookie quarterbacks a number of times. does this help in him developing a rookie quarterback? Things that he saw, thought that he could exploit with rookies, and do these things go into how you try to prepare Jaden? And so he answered that question and talked about, you know, the things that they want to do to help him prepare and get him to where he ultimately wants, they want him to be, right? He talked about Mike Sainristil and his diversity and the different things that he can bring to the table. Head coach DQ has talked about, wanting to explore as many different avenues with players as possible. That's important. Figuring out what guys can and can't do so that you can put them in those positions, come game time. And so Mike Sainristil is one of those guys they've explored with, returning punts and kickoffs and things of that nature. He's been back there a little bit because of his prior experience as an offensive player. But he's like, from a defensive standpoint, he's shown the ability to play really good man coverage. They like his ability, his movement skills. But he said at the same time, what you don't want to do is overload a young player and take away from what they do best and what you brought them there to do. Like essentially keeping the main thing. Like we brought him here to be one of the best nickel corners in the league. We don't want to overload his brain with other responsibilities and then we take away from him becoming the best nickel he can be. We brought him here to be that, and that's the main thing. If we can get him to add value somewhere else, so be it. But we really want to concentrate on that. But, we're going to explore all avenues is essentially what he said about him. I got excited. He talked about Dante Fowler Jr. There was a question about why Dante Fowler Jr. was brought here, right? And DQ pretty much said, without saying it, that's my dog. Like, that's my dog. That's my dog. Like wherever I go, Dante goes. And Dante said that when he, in his introductory presser, like he said, I've run through a brick wall for DQ. He knows that. Wherever DQ goes, if he need me, I'm there. And that's been the case. He had Dante Fowler Jr. in Atlanta. He had him in Dallas. Now he has him in Washington. Wherever DQ goes, Dante Fowler Jr. follows. And he said, look, we got a guy that's got some explosive ability to get to the quarterback in obvious passes situations, 2-minute drill situations. We know we can put this guy on the field, and he's still got explosiveness to get to the quarterback. Translation, we got ourselves a situational pass rusher for the first time since fill in the blank. You tell me, because I don't know. I'm excited about this. You guys know that because I've talked about it with John Kime. I talked about it all offseason about how excited I am about a guy who was brought here specifically with the duty of, hey, you just get to the quarterback. Don't worry about nothing else. 3rd and 7, go hunt. 2-minute drill, go hunt. Game on the line, go hunt. You put your best pass rushers on the field. You up 4. They need a touchdown. Go put Dante Fowler Jr. on the field and see if he can't get you something. I love it, man. Luke McCaffrey. All right. He talked about Luke McCaffrey. So the first thing he talked about was him, learning the position, learning from guys like Terry and wide receiver coach Bobby Ingram, and how that's a great guy to learn from. Another one of these dudes, former player who has that same perspective with the helmet on. So he's like, if I were, having a young player learn from a receiver, it'd be a guy like Bobby Ingram. So he talked about being really pleased with that relationship and the development there. He talked about being really, pleased with the work ethic. He's like, Luke McCaffrey has, that work ethic to go. That same work ethic he talks about with Terry and the seriousness surrounding football. Luke comes from a football family, so he possesses that in spades. He talked about his development and how he is a lot further along than you would expect from a guy who only has been playing the receiver position for 2 years. So he's like, yeah, he's a lot further along than I thought he would be at this current moment. And we're really pleased with what we've gotten from him. We love the development there. And we think that this kid, is going to have a great impact. And he said, I think a lot of the process being sped up for him might have been him playing quarterback. Again, the same thing I talked about with, excuse me, with Curtis, not Curtis, Amani Rogers, because when you are a former quarterback, you see it differently, right? You see the game differently. You understand angles, you understand zone better, where to sit down, what's an inviting target for your quarterback. You understand defenses a little bit better. So as a receiver now, you can conduct yourself in a different manner because you've got different perspectives of how to get open, where's the leverage, what's the best angle for you to come out of a break, out of a route to give your quarterback the easiest throw, things of that nature. I think he is a guy that is definitely high on their list right now. DQ talked about Nick Allegretti in particular, but he also mentioned Tyler Biadasz in talking about Nick Allegretti. And he talked about, obviously Tyler Biadasz coming from Dallas. He kind of knows what kind of a player he is. But he said with both of those dudes, they kind of came from, backgrounds where their voices weren't as loud, right? When you're coming from Dallas and you got a future first ballot Hall of Famer at left tackle, a future first ballot Hall of Famer at right guard, your voice is not one that resonates on that offensive line. You're just a guy on that offensive line, right? So, you come to Washington now and you're one of the veterans with a very loud voice. You could argue that of the guys on that offensive line, he's the only one with a multi-year deal with real money on it, right? Sam Cosmi is still on his rookie deal. Nick Allegretti was brought here essentially on backup money because he's never been a starter for real in this league. And none of the tackles are making real, game-changing money. Wiley's making solid money, but it's not, Tyler Biadasz's $30 million deal is the most expensive on the offensive line. We'll leave it at that, right? So again, he comes in and right away, he's one of the most impactful guys on this offensive line, or at least the money says so. And then in the case of Nick Allegretti, head coach Dan Quinn talked about loving his story, loving guys that have to get it out of the mud. Essentially, like, okay, nothing was given to Nick Allegretti. He's coming from Kansas City. He knows what winning looks like. He was part of a winning organization and outfit, but he wasn't a starter. So again, his voice was not very loud in that locker room or on that offensive line. He comes over here. He's got winning pedigree. He's going to get an opportunity. And so he's another guy that has something to prove and, sort of an axe to grind, if you will. And so he's talking about, a lot of that stuff and how those guys can impact that offensive line room and that group. So he talked about that. DQ was asked about the fan base and what did he know about this fan base before getting here. I didn't think his answer was really cohesive. I was really looking for something I could really sink my teeth into. He gets it, though. I know he gets it. And, his actions have proven that already. The whole shirt situation that he wore, that he got slapped on the wrist for, that was DQ pandering to the fan base, and he did a tremendous job. I think whoever told him, I don't know if anybody told him to do that or if he just knew to do it and that would get him brownie points. Job well done, right? And, he was here. He went to school at James Madison in the early 90s. So he kind of has, or I think he either went to school there or taught there, coached there, rather. Whatever the case may be, he was here towards the end of the glory years into the, the beginning of hell, but it mattered when he was here. So he got to see it when it actually meant something. I don't think he truly understood necessarily how bad it had gotten within the fan base till he got here. But I think he understands that it is their duty to bring this thing back. And he did talk about, and this is the second time I've heard him bring up Jerry Jones when he took the job, telling him, you're the right man for this job. You got to bring that fan base back. It's a great place to be, especially when they're winning, yada, yada, yada. That's all fine and dandy. And he said, look, winning helps a whole hell of a lot, but in order to get to that point, it's like chicken or the egg. Which happens first? Do you get the fans back and then they turn this into a tough environment to play at as an opposing team, which helps you win? Or do you have to first win to get the fans back here to turn it into a very tough environment for other teams to come in here and win? I think we know the answer to that as a fan base. You got to win first. It's no chicken or the egg for us. You want the fans to show up, stop selling their tickets to opposing teams' fans, stop allowing Dallas Cowboys, Philadelphia Eagles, New York Giants fans, stop allowing Arizona Cardinals fans and random ass teams that shouldn't be coming in here and making trips. Hey, my favorite team is coming here and I'm gonna make the trip because it's an easy ticket to get and it's cheap. Or, I live a couple states away, but this is the closest my team has been. So I'm going to go here to go see them play. No, F that. All right. I don't give a damn if you're a Vikings fan, a Cardinals fan, a Falcons fan. They shouldn't be coming in and filling our shit up. We shouldn't be hearing chants that they do at home here in Washington. And, winning is what's going to cure all of that. You win, and we've seen it as recent as 2015, which you like that. You win here, and the fans will show up. The last time it was like raucous and deafening was 2012. You heard Logan Paulson when he was on the show talk about how it was the best fan base he had ever been a part of, college, high school, any part of his life as an athlete. He had never been a part of anything more raucous and rabid than this fan base in 2012. And I know for some of you who are of a certain age, you're like, yeah, that wasn't shit compared to RFK. And we're not comparing it to that. Okay. We're comparing it to this iteration, FedEx Field, now Commanders Field, like this group since, Joe 1.0, like we're comparing it to Joe 2.0 and the Dan Snyder era. And 2012 was the apex. If you can get it back to that, we're in pretty good shape. Because I don't know if you'll ever get it back to, Joe 1.0 and anything that predated that, because we're no longer the Redskins and it's no longer RFK and the bottom stanchion doesn't shake and you can't recreate that. I remember one time Daniel Snyder saying he wanted to build a new stadium and he wanted to have the bottom stanchion shake. You can't recreate that shit. You can't try to manufacture it. That was organic. Just like the seat cushion game, when one fan threw the seat cushion and then all of them threw, like that's organic. You can't recreate that. Hell, we try to recreate We Want Dallas all the time and end up getting our brains bashed in. That was organic, right? We gotta develop new shit, create new memories. I've talked about that numerous times. We got to create new memories. The old ones are great, but we need new ones. How you establish that is by winning. And so Dan Quinn is like, yeah, I think we got to. No, you got to win, and he knows that. He understands that. He talked about Jordan McGee, and I talked about Jordan McGee, stock up for him, how he's been one of the standouts. Matter of fact, we just talked about that on the video I posted on Saturday. And he said that Jordan McGee has rare quickness, athleticism, and speed, and they're going to push him hard to try to get the most out of him because they see a rare breed of traits that you just don't get out of guys, especially that are this young, like a Jordan McGee. So we've been hearing that from people that have been in attendance. The tape suggested that, which is why I mocked him to them, and I liked him coming out of Temple, and they're seeing it firsthand, and they're loving what they're seeing. Red zone importance. They've had red zone periods to start in all 4 days, and DQ said that that's going to continue. They're going to continue to put emphasis on the red zone because, and there won't be a, block of days of camp, because what it feels like is going to be 3 days on, 1 day off, 3 days on, 1 day off. That's what it feels like. Now, that is subject to change, obviously, with the preseason being integrated in and joint practices and things of that nature. But right now, it feels like 3 days on, 1 day off, right? And if that continues, he's like, there will not be a block of 3 days where we won't go through red zone. It's important. And he said, we're going to be doing red zone tomorrow, right? With the pads on. And we're going to have like little games. Like he said, they're going to have a 2-point conversion contest, essentially best out of 5, right? Where who can get to 3 wins first, right? Can the offense get 3 2-point conversions, or will the defense get 3 conversion stops? So trying to spice it up, make things interesting, make it fun. You love to see it. He talked about, the red zone is just important. He talked about infighting, and I thought it was an interesting question for this time of camp. Usually infighting doesn't take place until the dog days of training camp, right? When the pads have been on and you've been beating up your teammate. Like, I think the joint practices are going to help, and they had the Ravens last year, as you guys brought up. So I think you get less infighting, but there's going to be, it's a natural part of the game. You get after it, somebody hits you the wrong way, you stick up for a teammate, et cetera, et cetera. It's hot outside. The weather has been pretty mild to start, so that's been good. And they've been practicing a lot of times in the morning. So they really haven't had a lot of that. But as it gets hotter, you got the pads on, somebody gets hit hard, or, you took a little bit of exception to the way this was done. And then you're going up against the same players over and over. Yeah, some shit's going to go down. Like, it's a part of the game. It's going to happen. You could try to coach it out. It's just not, it's impossible. But, he talked about infighting and how that's not what we do. That's not a part of our program. And he said, I haven't talked about it yet because you haven't had to, because the pads haven't gone on. I think that starts to crop up and creep in, probably sometime next week, as the pads have been on now for, a week or so. And now you're getting tired of hitting the same guys over and over. Now the shit starts to, and then all it takes is for one guy to put his hand in your face or push you a little bit after the whistle or hit you a little bit harder than you thought he should have. Or, hey, I told you if you do that shit again, I was going to get in your mix. And then he do it again. And then all of a sudden it's a little bit of a brouhaha. But he's like, we're not doing that. Because he's like, look, if you get into some shit during the game and you cost us, it's repercussions. You do that shit out here, it's repercussions. So I think translation, we ain't going for no stupid shit. And that kind of bleeds into the last thing that he talked about, which was flags. So obviously they have officials out there that are at practice throwing a flag, kind of explaining why the flag was thrown so they can see what a penalty is. But he's like, it's 2 separate types of penalties. And one is acceptable and we can condone it and we can coach from it. The other, unacceptable. Cannot happen. We won't have it. And we got to make sure that we on top of that shit now. So he talked about pre and post snap penalties, and then combative penalties is the second category. So the combative ones, it's in the heat of battle. These things happen. You don't want them to, but that's, pass interference. That's illegal contact. That's holding on the offense, holding on the defense. Things that happen during the course of the play where shit just happens, right? You would like to avoid it, but it happens, right? The pre and post snap penalties, he's like, nah, that shit right there can't happen. And when you talk about pre-snap penalties, you're talking about, illegal formation, guys not set up correctly. We saw that cost us a game back in 2022. Cost us a game because I think we just got hosed. Terry was jerked by the official against the Giants on that Sunday night game. But, you can see how that can hurt you. Obviously, false start penalties, that's a pre-snap penalty. That's very avoidable. Post-snap penalties, offsides, right? They get you on a hard count, you jump offsides. You line up offsides as a defender, that's a pre-snap, post-snap penalty where you go, bro, what the hell are you doing? Excuse me. So those are, another kind of post-snap penalty that's sort of combative, but it's poor technique is hands to the face as a corner. Like you try to get a jam off, but your hands aren't in the proper position. And so instead of you hitting that, because they tell you to aim for the outside of the shoulder, right? Right here in that shoulder range, chest pec range. Like that's where you're aiming to jam. Especially if you're doing a one-hand jab. Like if you're gonna kind of skate with a receiver as a defender, that's all you're looking to do is just get a piece of the jersey, throw them off a little bit. But if you got poor technique and you too far in, and then your hand slides up, now you at the hands to the face. That's a free first down. It could be 3rd and 12, and you get caught on some stupid bullshit because you got poor technique, and now that's a 5-yard penalty that results in a first down on 3rd and 12. So you just got to be really careful with that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff that they can't, like, we can't have that, right? Whereas combative penalties, we can coach you on that, right? Like, we get it. Shit happens during the course of a play. We'll learn from it. But he's like, we can't have the stupid penalties, period. Like, we're not going to be one of those type of teams. So, and then he talked about Sam Hartman. Sam Hartman is interesting because he's like, there has not been a lot of snaps for Sam Hartman to start. He's like, as we get deeper into camp, there may be a little bit more as these practices are widened out in terms of length. And you start to see they've had a lot of hour and 30-minute practices. As you get, deeper into camp, it's going to go to 2 hours, maybe 2 hours and 30 minutes. You extend these practices a bit to get a little bit more in, and that would allow you for more reps and more opportunities for a guy like Sam Hartman. But he's like, Sam's done a really good job of finding opportunities before practice, after practice, because I think you forget quickly that he wasn't drafted. And right now, could they keep a third quarterback? Maybe. I still think they're only keeping 2. But I think they want to continue to work with Sam because guess what? Somebody's going to have to be the backup quarterback here next year when Marcus Mariota is no longer here. Somebody's got to be the backup quarterback. And it could be Sam Hartman, right? Could be Jeff Driscoll for all we know. But right now it feels like Sam Hartman is the backup quarterback. He's like Gardner Minshew of the future here in Washington. That's what it feels like. But, we'll see what happens. So that was DQ and his presser in a nutshell. And that's pretty much all I have for you. I do have one comment here from Rocky D, and then we'll take care of that, and then we'll get out of here. So, Rocky D, thank you for being a member of the MOBB. Thank you for being a member for 20 months. You're getting close to that 2-year anniversary. Really appreciate you. Who writes, DQ was a D tackle for Salisbury U, didn't coach JMU, just for your information. Yeah, I know he went to Salisbury. He was like a D2 or D3 player or whatever. I know he was here at, I think he was at James Madison for a brief spell, I believe. Again, don't quote me on that. But he was in this area. I know that in the late 80s, early 90s, again, when this fan base was probably at its peak of its superpowers, he was here in the area. So, and he talked about that before. And again, don't get me the line about his coaching experience, where he played, this, that, and the third. I know he didn't play at James Madison. He might have coached there, if that's in fact the case. Whatever the case may be, I just know he was in the area here. And that's where he kind of got a feel for how important NFC East football was. He talked about that. And he talked about it at the presser today, or yesterday now, about, the NFC East games, John Madden and Pat Summerall calling them, and how important they were, and this, that, and the third. So, yeah, there was a little bit of that as well, but I digress. So, we'll be back tomorrow, first padded practice of camp. That's going to be a big story onto itself. And to me, this is when shit gets real. When the pads go on, now we got a lot to discuss, because now there's no talking about, well, the pads aren't on yet, so ain't no more of that. Right? Ain't no more of that. If Brandon Coleman's getting his ass handed to him, we gonna know about it, because I was not pleased with everything that I saw from him at the Senior Bowl. I thought dudes were driving his ass back at the Senior Bowl. Really, like, I went back and watched after we drafted him, some of his reps one-on-one, and I thought guys were really getting into his chest and driving him back. He fought like hell, but he was getting moved. So I'm gonna be really interested to see how all of this looks now when the pads come on. And now it's no more excuses. It's no more, we'll know more when the pads come on. We start to, gather intel now. Now we starting to, collect data on these offensive linemen in particular and what they're about. And we're going to find out a lot about, different positions and how they go about business. And now shit gets real to me. So, Rocky D, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Once again, thank you for being a member of the MOBB, who writes, Sam Howell looking like a bad investment in Seattle, LOL. Who knew? I was pulling for him. If you're going to allow early reports to skew what your thought of Sam Howell is, then this ain't for you, right? Like, I don't worry about any of that kind of stuff. Even if the reports were that Jaden Daniels wasn't looking good in camp right now, I wouldn't have been moved. You don't want to hear that, obviously, but it's early, and it's it's a process, and so I don't that doesn't spook me. I'm still pulling for him, and I still think he has a chance to be a really good quarterback. And you know what? Last year might have done him in. I've seen quarterbacks destroyed in 1 year. I watched Patrick Ramsey come in here with a boatload of confidence, and in 1 year playing in that running gun offense with no protection, I watched him go from a guy that came in here super confident to a guy that was a shell of himself. I saw it happen with David Carr, systematically get his ass whooped to the point where he was no longer that guy that came out of Houston as the #1 overall pick. You put a guy in a rough situation, you get him beat up, you tell him don't do this, don't do that, and it does change who you are fundamentally. There's only so many hits you can take. And a lot of y'all kept saying that last year, and I didn't want to believe it because Sam was my guy and I was pulling for him. But you get your ass beat enough, you get hit enough, you start seeing ghosts. That's some real shit. So, who knows what's going on out there in Seattle. I wish him the best. He's not here, so I honestly don't give a shit, to be honest with you. I'm pulling for him, but he don't play for us anymore. He'll always be a member of the family, right? But at the end of the day, I'm more concerned with what's going on here with this group than I am with what's going on out there in Seattle. Wish him nothing but the best, but I'm all about Jaden Daniels and his development and seeing him become the quarterback that Sam couldn't here in Washington. So we'll see what happens. I heard that it wasn't going well for him too. And one of the things that our fan base loves to do is we take a lot of pleasure in somebody who didn't work out here in their demise elsewhere, so we can say, see, it wasn't us. I think that's bullshit personally. Like, I'm rooting for Chase Young. If he turns out to be everything he wasn't here in New Orleans, good for him. Like, I got no animosity towards Chase Young. Shit didn't work here. We didn't have good coaches, right? Montez Sweat goes to Chicago and crushes it, and he has 14.5 sacks next year. More power to him. It didn't work here because we didn't have good coaches. So I don't blame a lot of the players that came through here and the shit didn't work the way that we thought it should have. And I'm not rooting for them. Cam Curl, I hope he goes and kills it in LA. I had no animosity towards him, and I don't want to see anybody fail. So we can say, see, I'm glad we got a 2nd round pick for him. I'm glad we got a 3rd round pick for him. Both things can be true. They can go and kick ass, and we can still be happy about the 2nd round pick that we got for him and the selection that was made. Or the 3rd round pick from Chase Young's trade with the 49ers. And we can feel really good about what we got from him, right? Both can be true. But that's nor here nor there. Bottom line is Sam hasn't gotten off to a great start by a number of reports. I'm rooting for him. I hope he cleans that shit up, but I'm more concerned with what's going on here than anywhere else. But I digress. That's gonna do it for me, your man Louie T. I thank you for joining me here on Training Camp Confidential, Day 4 with the Washington Commanders. Day 5 will feature the first day in pads. Strap it up. Buckle that chin strap up. Let's go to work. Pads are on. And shit's about to get real. All right. Shit is about to get real. Not that it wasn't before, but when the pads come on, it's totally different. Bart Scott. Can't wait. So you guys know we'll be back tomorrow. That'll be a lot of fun to discuss. Just the pads being on. It sounds different. It feels different. It is different when the pads go on. So we'll have a lot to discuss for day 1 of pads. And a bevy of other, topics. And then we also will have some other, players. And of course, we'll hear from DQ stepping up to the podium. So we'll have all of that and more tomorrow on Training Camp Confidential. Until then, you guys enjoy the rest of your evening. See you guys next time. You know what it is. Post up. Take command. Until next time, you guys have a good one. God bless. Good night.